The letter arrived on a Tuesday, its official seal glinting in the afternoon sun. My hands trembled as I opened it, the final paperwork confirming my inheritance from Grandma Rose. After 2 years of battling my mother-in-law's attempts to seize control, justice was finally being served. My name is Sarah Chen, and until 3 years ago, I thought I had a decent relationship with my mother-in-law, Patricia Thompson. That all changed when my beloved grandmother passed away, leaving me her estate worth $4.2 million. I just don't understand why she'd leave everything to you, Patricia had said during the reading of the will, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the conference room table. After all, you're not even blood family. I could still hear the disdain in her voice, the way she emphasized not family like it was something dirty. But Grandma Rose hadn't cared about blood relations. She loved me from the moment her grandson Michael brought me home, treating me like the granddaughter she never had. For 8 years, while Patricia spent her time at country clubs and charity galas, I visited Rose every Sunday. We cooked together, gardened together, and shared stories about our lives. When she started showing signs of dementia, I was the one who helped her navigate medical appointments and organized her care. Someone needs to oversee her finances, Patricia had declared during a family dinner, about 6 months before Rose passed. She's clearly not in her right mind anymore, making all these changes to her will. I should have recognized the warning signs then. The way Patricia started showing up at Rose's house unannounced, hovering over her shoulder as she reviewed her financial documents. But I was too focused on caring for Rose to see the manipulation happening right in front of me. It wasn't until after the funeral that I realized just how far Patricia would go to get her hands on Rose's money. I filed a petition to be named executor of the estate, she announced one morning, walking into my kitchen like she owned it. Giving your limited financial experience is really for the best. I set down my coffee cup, trying to keep my voice steady. The will specifically names me as executor, Patricia. Rose wanted me to handle her estate. She smiled, that condescending smile I'd grown to hate. Dear, you're a kindergarten teacher. What do you know about managing millions? Besides, Rose wasn't in her right mind when she made those changes. We both know that. But what Patricia didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment for years. Ever since I noticed her increasing interest in Rose's finances, I'd started documenting everything. Every conversation, every surprise visit, every attempt to isolate Rose from other family members, it was all recorded. I had videos of Rose explicitly stating her wishes, recorded with her full knowledge and consent during her lucid moments. I had documentation from her doctors, confirming her mental competency when she updated her will. And most damaging of all, I had recordings of Patricia herself, plotting with her lawyer to have Rose declared incompetent. We just need to get her evaluated by the right doctor, she'd said in one recording, not realizing my phone was capturing every word. Someone who understands the situation. Once we have her declared incompetent, we can challenge anything she's done in the past year, including that ridiculous will. The first hint Patricia got that things weren't going her way came during the initial court hearing. Her lawyer, a slick man named James Barrett, stood before the judge with his usual confidence. Your Honor, we have serious concerns about Mrs. Thompson's mental state when these changes were made, he began. The deceased was suffering from documented cognitive decline. Objection, Your Honor, my lawyer, Susan Martinez, interrupted. We have extensive medical documentation proving Mrs. Thompson was competent when she updated her will, including evaluations from 3 separate neurologists. Barrett faltered slightly but pressed on. Nevertheless, we believe it's in the best interest of the estate to have someone with more financial experience managing these assets. Mrs. Chen is a schoolteacher with no background in. Your Honor, Susan cut in again. If we may present Exhibit A. She proceeded to play one of my recordings, a conversation between Patricia and Barrett where they explicitly discussed their plan to seize control of the estate. The color drained from Patricia's face as her own voice filled the courtroom. I don't care what it takes. That money belongs in this family, not with some outsider who married in. Find a way to get it done. The judge's expression darkened as he listened. When the recording ended, he turned to Patricia's lawyer. Mr. Barrett, are you aware that conspiring to fraudulently seize control of an estate is a serious offense? Barrett tugged at his collar, suddenly looking less confident. Your Honor, I can explain. But there was no explaining away the evidence. Over the next 2 hours, Susan methodically presented our case. The medical records, the videos of Rose, the multiple recordings of Patricia's attempts to manipulate the situation. By the time we finished, Patricia's petition wasn't just denied. She was facing potential legal consequences for her actions. This court finds clear evidence of attempted fraud, the judge declared. Mrs. Chen will retain her position as executor, as per the deceased's wishes. Furthermore, Mrs. Patricia Thompson is hereby barred from any involvement with the estate. Mr. Barrett, I suggest you speak with the ethics board about your role in this matter. As we left the courthouse that day, Patricia grabbed my arm. Her perfectly composed facade had cracked, revealing the fury beneath. You think you've won, she hissed. This isn't over. That money belongs in this family. I calmly removed her hand from my arm. You're right, Patricia. The money does belong in the family. That's exactly where Rose placed it, with me. You're not family, she spat. You're just some gold digger who wormed her way in. Mom, stop. Michael's voice cut through her tirade. My husband had been quietly supportive throughout this ordeal, torn between loyalty to his mother and his knowledge of what was right. Sarah is my wife, he continued, taking my hand. She was more family to Grandma Rose than you ever were. All those years you were too busy for Sunday visits, Sarah was there. When Rose needed help, Sarah was there. The only person trying to take advantage of this situation is you. Patricia recoiled as if she'd been slapped. For a moment, she just stared at us, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Then she turned on her heel and stormed off, her expensive heels clicking against the courthouse floor. That evening, as Michael and I sat in our kitchen discussing the day's events, my phone buzzed with text messages from Patricia's friends. Prominent society women she'd enlisted in her campaign against me. You've made a powerful enemy, one message read. The Thompson family has a long memory. I showed the messages to Michael, who just shook his head. They can't hurt you anymore, he said. We have the truth on our side. But we both knew this wasn't really about truth or justice. For Patricia, it was about control. About maintaining her image as the matriarch of a wealthy family. Losing control of Rose's estate wasn't just a financial blow. It was a social embarrassment she wouldn't easily forget. As I sat there reading through the increasingly hostile messages, I realized something important. This wasn't just about protecting my inheritance anymore. It was about standing up to a woman who had spent years manipulating and bullying others to get her way. I picked up my phone and began forwarding the threatening messages to Susan. If Patricia wanted to continue this fight, I would be ready. I had learned from our first battle, documentation was everything. The next morning, I went to work as usual, teaching my kindergarten class and trying to maintain some normalcy. But during my lunch break, I received an urgent call from Susan. Patricia's filed an appeal, she said without preamble. She's claiming she has new evidence about Rose's mental state, but that's not the worst part. I braced myself. What else? She's also filed a complaint with your school board, alleging professional misconduct. She's trying to get you fired, Sarah. I gripped the phone tighter, anger rising in my chest. On what grounds? She's claiming you used your position as a teacher to manipulate Rose, that you brought her to school events and used the children to emotionally manipulate her into changing her will. The accusation was so absurd, it would have been funny if it weren't so potentially damaging to my career. Yes, I had brought Rose to some school events. She loved seeing the children perform in holiday shows. But the idea that I had somehow used this to manipulate her was ridiculous. We need to meet, Susan said. Tonight if possible. This is getting ugly, and we need to be prepared. As I hung up the phone, I caught my reflection in the classroom window. The woman staring back at me wasn't the same person who had once tried so hard to win Patricia's approval. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who wouldn't back down from a fight. Patricia wanted to play hardball. Fine. But she was about to learn that I had a few more cards left to play, cards that would make her previous humiliation in court look like a minor embarrassment. Patricia's attempt to have me fired backfired spectacularly. The school board called an emergency meeting to review her allegations, but I came prepared. Mrs. Thompson's claims are not only false, they're malicious, Susan stated, presenting the board with a thick folder of evidence. We have signed statements from multiple witnesses, including school staff and parents, confirming that Mrs. Rose Thompson's visits to the school were always appropriate and supervised. But our ace in the hole was a video recording from the previous year's Christmas pageant. There was Rose, sitting in the audience with other grandparents, her face beaming as she watched the children perform. More importantly, the video showed Patricia herself standing at the back of the auditorium, clearly aware of and unbothered by her mother-in-law's presence at school events. If Mrs. Chen was using these events to manipulate Mrs. Rose Thompson, why did he raise concerns at the time? The board chairman asked Patricia directly. She fumbled for an answer, her usual poise cracking. I didn't realize at the time. Didn't realize what? Susan pressed. That your mother-in-law enjoyed spending time with her grandson's wife and her students, or that you could use these innocent visits as ammunition in your vendetta. The board dismissed Patricia's complaint unanimously, but the damage to her reputation was just beginning. The local paper caught wind of the story, and suddenly the Thompson family's dirty laundry was being aired in public. Prominent socialite attempts to frame teacher in inheritance dispute, read the headline. The article detailed Patricia's attempts to seize control of the estate, her false accusations against me, and her history of manipulative behavior. The social fallout was immediate. Patricia's country club friends, the same ones who had been sending me threatening messages, suddenly went silent. Her position on various charity boards became awkward as other members distanced themselves. But Patricia wasn't done fighting. Her appeal of the original court decision moved forward, with her lawyer claiming to have new evidence about Rose's mental state. The new evidence turned out to be testimony from Rose's former housekeeper, Maria, who claimed she had witnessed Rose in states of confusion, unable to recognize family members or remember basic facts. What Patricia didn't know was that I had maintained contact with Maria after Rose's death. The morning of the appeal hearing, Maria walked into court with us, not with Patricia. Mrs. Ramirez, Susan began her questioning. Can you tell us about your recent conversation with Mrs. Patricia Thompson? Maria straightened in her seat. She offered me money to lie, she stated firmly. She wanted me to say Mrs. Rose was confused all the time, but it wasn't true. Yes, sometimes she had bad days, but she always knew who she loved and who truly cared for her. The judge's face darkened as Maria detailed Patricia's attempts to bribe her. When she finished testifying, he turned to Patricia's lawyer. Mr. Barrett, are you aware that suborning perjury is a criminal offense? Barrett, looking increasingly uncomfortable, requested a brief recess. When court resumed 20 minutes later, he announced that his client was withdrawing her appeal. But the judge wasn't finished. Mrs. Thompson, he said, his voice stern, this court takes a very dim view of attempting to corrupt the judicial process. You are hereby fined $50,000 for contempt of court, and I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for possible criminal charges. Patricia sat there, rigid with shock, as the judge continued. Furthermore, you were ordered to pay all legal fees incurred by Mrs. Chen in defending against this frivolous appeal. Should you attempt any further legal action regarding this estate, you will face additional sanctions. As we left the courthouse for the second time, Patricia was surrounded by reporters. The society pages that had once featured her charity work now carried photos of her trying to shield her face from cameras. That evening, as Michael and I sat in our backyard discussing the day's events, his phone rang. It was his sister Catherine, Patricia's daughter, who had remained neutral throughout the conflict. Mom's had a complete meltdown, she reported. She's locked herself in her room and won't talk to anyone. Dad's talking about taking her to a therapist. Michael sighed heavily. Maybe that's not a bad idea. This obsession with controlling Grandma's money. It's destroyed her reputation, her relationships. And for what? Catherine added. The money was never hers to begin with. Grandma Rose knew exactly what she was doing when she left everything to Sarah. After hanging up, Michael turned to me. I'm sorry, he said softly. Sorry for all of this, for not standing up to her sooner. I took his hand. You did stand up to her when it mattered most. And now maybe she'll finally get the help she needs. Over the next few months, we heard through family members that Patricia had indeed started seeing a therapist. The potential criminal charges were dropped after she agreed to make a substantial donation to a local elder care facility. As for the inheritance, I honored Rose's wishes exactly as she had intended. Half of the money went into a trust for education, both for our future children and for scholarships for underprivileged students. The other half was invested in expanding the small community garden Rose had loved, turning it into a thriving urban farm that provided fresh produce to local food banks. 1 year after our final court battle, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Patricia, written on her therapist's advice as part of her recovery process. "Dear Sarah," it began, "I owe you an apology. My actions were driven by pride, greed, and a misguided sense of entitlement. I convinced myself that you were the outsider, the threat to our family's legacy. In reality, you were the one truly carrying on Rose's legacy of kindness and generosity." The letter went on for several pages, expressing remorse for her actions and asking for a chance to make amends. It was signed simply, "With regret, Patricia." I showed the letter to Michael, who read it carefully. "Do you think she means it?" he asked. "I don't know," I replied honestly, "but I'm willing to find out." The following Sunday, exactly 3 years after Rose's passing, we invited Patricia to join us at the community garden. As she walked through the thriving beds of vegetables and flowers, I could see something in her expression shift. "Rose would have loved this," she said quietly, touching a blooming rose bush, one of many I had transplanted from her original garden. She always said gardens were for growing people, not just plants. "That's why she left everything to me," I said gently, "not because she loved me more, but because she trusted me to grow something meaningful from what she left behind." Patricia nodded, tears in her eyes. "I understand that now. I just wish I hadn't had to lose so much to learn that lesson." As we walked through the garden together, I thought about Rose and what she would make of all this. She had always said that money was like water. It could either nourish growth or erode foundations, depending on how you used it. Patricia's attempts to seize control of the inheritance had nearly destroyed our family. But in the end, Rose's wisdom had prevailed. The money had done exactly what she intended. It had revealed true characters, tested relationships, and ultimately helped heal old wounds. Today, the community garden stands as a testament to Rose's legacy. Local schoolchildren come for lessons about growing food and caring for the environment. Families gather for community events in the pavilion built in Rose's memory. And yes, Patricia occasionally volunteers, working alongside others to tend the gardens her mother-in-law loved so much. She's different now, humbled by her fall from grace, but perhaps better for it. The perfectly coiffed society matriarch has been replaced by someone more genuine, more willing to get her hands dirty in actual soil rather than family politics. As for me, I continue teaching kindergarten, sharing Rose's love of learning with new generations. The inheritance changed many things in our lives, but it didn't change who I am or what I believe in. Sometimes, when I'm working in the garden, I think I can feel Rose's presence among the flowers she loved so much. I imagine her smiling, satisfied that her legacy grew into something even more beautiful than she planned. And I smile too, knowing that the real inheritance wasn't the money at all. It was the strength to stand up for what's right, the wisdom to use resources for good, and the understanding that true family isn't about blood or money, but about love and trust freely given. Patricia learned that lesson the hard way. But in the end, maybe that's exactly what Rose intended all along.